No man was strong enough for her until a stranger rode down off the ridge and refused to raise a fist. 3 men lay groaning in the Apache dust at her feet, a fourth already spurring his horseback the way he came, and Nasha stood over them without so much as a quickened breath. The sacred passage behind her closed once again. At her hung a small blue stone, turquoise wrapped in silver wire on a fraying cord, a thing she claimed she found by the river, though no river had ever given her anything but grief. It had been her only warmth since the grandmother who raised her went cold into the ground 3 winters back. But before the next dawn broke over the canyon, a name from a massacre 10 years buried would ride into the light, and every wall she had spent a decade building would be tested by the one man who did not want to climb it. 3 men lay in the dust. A fourth just stood there, frozen, watching the woman who put them down without ever once reaching for a weapon. She was taller than any of them, broader through the shoulders, and she was not even breathing hard. Have you ever been judged by a stranger before they bothered to learn your name? Before they knew one single thing about what you had lived through, what you had lost, what it cost you just to be standing there in the first place? Hold on to that feeling for a moment. Because the woman standing over those men in the dirt had spent 10 long years being nothing but a name to everyone who ever crossed her path. A warning passed quietly between riders. A story told around campfires at night so that men would know which canyon to steer wide around and why. Her name was Nasha. And in the spring of 1850, on a hard stretch of Apache land in the Southwestern Territory, she was the only thing standing between her people and everyone who had come to take from them. The 4 men had ridden in that morning, looking for a way through the passage. What they found instead was her. 3 of them lay groaning in the dirt now, one clutching a wrist that would not bend right for a month, another curled around ribs that had learned a painful lesson about her patience. The last man edged backward on unsteady legs, both palms open, like a fellow who has only just understood that the rattle he heard in the grass was never the wind. She moved through them the way a river moves through stone. Not fast, not wild, just certain. Every strike had a place it was meant to land. Every motion carried a reason behind it. There was something almost gentle in the precision of it, as though she were not fighting these men at all, but working through a tired old problem she had solved. So many times the answer had stopped meaning anything to her. She wore Apache clothing stitched together here and there, with pieces of frontier trade, a worn leather belt that had not come from any of her own people. Moccasins gone pale at the toes from 1,000 miles of dry ground, and at her throat hung a small thing that caught the early sun and threw it back at the world, a stone. Turquoise, wrapped tight in silver wire, hung from a plain and fraying cord. The last man broke and ran for his horse. Nasha did not chase him. She never did. Fear finished the work that her hands only ever started. That man would ride hard to the next settlement and tell them all the very same thing, that an Apache giant guarded the sacred passage through the mountains, that no man had ever walked away from her with his pride still whole. That trying was the same as begging to be humbled in front of every soul he knew. She had built that reputation on purpose, one careful piece at a time, year after year. She had turned herself into a living wall between her band and the endless flood of settlers who looked at Apache ground and saw only empty property waiting to be claimed and fenced and named after themselves. And it had worked. God help her. It had been working for a long time now. 10 winters of men turning their horses around at the mouth of the canyon rather than test the stories they had heard. But there was a cost to being a wall. Walls do not get to rest. Walls do not get asked how they are feeling. A wall only ever gets measured by whether it is still standing, and Nasha had been standing so long she had half forgotten there had ever been a girl behind the stone. That morning, as she bent to gather the supplies the beaten men had left scattered across the ground, she felt it. Eyes on her back, heat where there should have been only the thin cool of first light, a rider, up on the ridge above the passage, watching her and making no effort at all to hide it. She had known he was there for a quarter of an hour already. She had felt him the way a person feels a storm building, long before the sky will admit to it. Most men looked away the very instant she caught them staring. It was the safe thing to do, the natural thing. A man who valued his teeth learned quickly not to hold her gaze. This one did not look away. He sat easy in his saddle, one hand resting on his horse's neck to keep the animal quiet, and he watched her the way you might watch weather roll in across an open plain. Not with fear, not with hunger, just with a still and patient attention that unsettled her far more than all the aggression of the 4 men she had just laid out in the dust, because aggression she understood. Aggression had a shape she could read and answer. This stillness was a question. And Nasha had learned a very long time ago that questions were more dangerous than any fist a man could throw. The rider did not stay on the ridge long. Nasha watched him gather his reins, and she felt the old familiar coldness settle into her hands. Another man with a reason he believed mattered more than her sacred ground. She had 100 ways to send him back the way he came, and she had used every one of them before. What she did not have, standing there in the morning light with a dead woman's amulet warm against her collarbone, was any idea that this particular rider carried a name from her own past in his saddlebags. That the mother he had never once mentioned to a living Apache soul had walked this same country before Nasha was even born. Or that the small blue stone at her throat, the one she had told herself she found by chance beside the river, was about to become the first thread in an unraveling that would strip her down past the muscle and the reputation to something she had buried so deep. She had convinced herself it no longer breathed. She knew none of that yet. She only knew that a stranger was riding down toward her, slow and unafraid, and that every wall she had ever built was about to be tested by a man who did not seem interested in climbing it at all. He came down the slope slow, hands where she could see them the whole way. Every movement deliberate and unhurried, like a man who had learned exactly how to walk up on something that could kill him without ever giving it a reason to. Nasha did not reach for the blade at her hip, but every muscle in her slid quietly into that narrow space between standing still and striking, the readiness so practiced now that it cost her nothing to hold. He drew rein 30 feet out, far enough to show respect, close enough to be heard without either of them raising a voice. He was younger than she had guessed from the ridge. Around 30, she thought, though the sun and the hard miles had weathered him past his years. Dark hair gone dusty at the edges, and that same unhurried stillness sitting on him like it belonged there, which did not match the trail dirt caked into every seam of his clothes. Passages closed. Her English carried only the faintest edge of an accent. Turn back. Can't do that. He swung down from the saddle without hurry and kept his eyes level with hers. I've got medicine that's needed in a settlement past the canyon. Children are sick with fever. Bad fever, not my concern. Figured you'd say that. A beat passed between them. Asking anyway, she stepped closer, walking on the balls of her feet the way she always did, silent despite her size. She read him the way she read everything that came to her passage, his posture loose but ready, the steady rhythm of his breathing that did not quicken when she closed the distance, the way his right hand hung near the pistol on his hip and never once drifted the last few inches toward it. Every man who comes to this ground believes he has a good reason. She stopped an arm's length from him and looked down, using her height the way she used everything, as a tool. You all believe your reasons weigh more than sacred earth. Maybe I do believe that. His voice never climbed. Maybe there are children in that settlement dying while we stand here debating it, and maybe your ground is the only path that puts the medicine in their hands, before it's too late to matter. His eyes did not leave hers, and this close she could see the calluses layered thick across his palms, the kind that told a whole story about a life lived rough and lean and close to the bone. Whatever else he was no soft settler come to fence her river. You are not like the others. It was not a compliment, and she did not offer it as one. That makes you more dangerous or less. We will see. She turned her back on him, slow and deliberate. It was an insult in every language men had ever spoken, and a test in every one of them besides. A man who could not stand being shown a woman's back was a man who would fold the moment things turned hard. You want to pass, she called over her shoulder. You prove you're strong enough first. That's the only coin I take here. Cole Barrett looked at the width of her shoulders, at the ease with which she carried herself, at the 3 men still nursing bruised pride and worse in the dirt behind him. And then he did the one single thing she had not braced herself for. I'm not interested in fighting you. That stopped her cold. She turned back slow, and surprise crossed her face before suspicion arrived to swallow it. Every man wants to prove himself against me. Everyone. It's the only reason any of you ever climbed down off your horses. I'm not every man, then what are you?" He met her stare and held it. No flinch, no bluster. Someone who already knows there's more than one kind of strong. "I don't need to lose a fight to learn something I figured out a long time ago." The words dropped into the space between them and simply hung there, charged and strange. And Nasha felt something rise in her chest that she had no name for, or none she was willing to say. Because he was supposed to swing at her. He was supposed to hand her the reason she needed to send him off battered like all the rest. His flat refusal to play the part she had written for him knocked her off her footing in a way no fist had ever once managed, which she would come to understand much later. Was the whole trouble with the man from the very first moment. A clever tongue doesn't buy passage through here. But the hard edge had gone out of her voice, and they both heard it go. Didn't reckon it would. He crouched near the packs the beaten men had abandoned. "Mind if I look through what they left behind? Might be something in here worth carrying to sick children. No sense letting good supplies rot in the dirt." She watched him sort through the scattered gear. Quick hands. Sure of themselves. He handled every item like a man who had gone without long enough to know its exact worth down to the ounce. And when he found a water skin near the bottom of the pile, he did not drink. He rose and held it out to her first, before a single drop touched his own cracked lips. Something old and rusted turned over hard in her chest, because the last time a stranger had offered her kindness before taking any for himself, she had believed in it with her whole young heart. And people she loved had gone cold into the ground because she did. She did not take the water. Where did a white man learn Apache manners? The question came out sharper than she intended, an accusation more than a question. He looked up, squinting against the sun standing behind her. "My mother. She lived with a band 4 winters before I was ever born. Said they found her half dead at the edge of their country and chose to take her in when they had every reason not to. She never forgot it, not one day of her life. Taught me that respect and surrender aren't the same word, whatever most folks seem to think. That she had not expected. She had braced for a lie or an evasion dressed up in fine clothes to look like an answer. Men usually handed her one or the other and called it honesty. Cole bear it." He added, standing and brushing the dust from his knees. "Figure if I'm going to ask you to trust me with your sacred ground, the least I can do is give you my name to hold against me." She said nothing, but she filed it away the way she filed everything that might one day matter. Cole Barrett. A man who offered his name freely to a woman who had not asked for it. A man whose mother had been shown mercy by strangers and had raised her son to carry that debt like it was worth something. Nasha did not know yet how far back that debt ran. She did not know that the woman who had shown Cole's mother Miss Mercy all those winters ago in a fevered camp had hands she would recognize. She only knew that the stranger in front of her had refused, twice now, to be the man she needed him to be so she could turn him away, and that the answer to his 3 years of searching was hanging, at that exact moment, from the fraying cord around her own throat. The amulet gave her away before her mouth ever could. Cole rose from the packs with the water skin still in his hand, and his eyes caught on the small blue stone at her throat, and he went as still as he had been on the ridge. Stiller. Every easy line of him locked tight all at once, and for a moment he simply looked at it, the way a man looks at a face he had given up hope of ever seeing again. "That stone." His voice had dropped somewhere low and careful. "Where did you come by it?" "Found it." Her hand rose to cover it on instinct, closing around the wire and the turquoise. "By the river, 2 seasons back." "Why does a stranger care what hangs around my neck?" "Because my mother made one just like it." He did not blink. He did not look away from her hand. With her own 2 hands. Turquoise wrapped in silver wire hung from a plain cord. "She gave it to a woman who saved her life during a fever, out in this country before I was born. A healer." The dry air between them seemed to thin. Nasha felt the ground she had stood on so surely, for so long, begin to tilt underneath her. "She died 3 winters ago," Cole went on, and now something moved through his voice that had nothing to do with the passage or the medicine or the sick children. "Beyond it, my mother. I sat with her at the end, and, near the last of it, she took my hand and asked me to find that healer if she was still living, to carry her thanks. To tell the woman who gave her back her life that she'd spent every year of it grateful, and never once found the way to say so. He exhaled slow. I've been looking for 3 years, 2 territories. Every band that would let me near enough to ask, and I'd near enough given it up. Nasha's fingers tightened around the stone until the wire bit into her palm, because she knew this amulet. She had not found it by the river at all, and she had known that from the first lie she told herself about it. She had taken it from the small bundle of things left behind when the woman who raised her had passed, and she had worn it every day since, because it was the only warmth she had left of her. The healer who made this, she said, and her voice came out flat and guarded. The voice she used when she needed to give nothing away, is gone. She has been gone 3 winters now. Something crossed Cole's face too fast to name. Grief and recognition tangled together, and underneath both of them, impossibly, a kind of relief, the look of a man who had carried a stone in his boot so long he had forgotten how to walk without it, and had finally been given leave to set it down. Then you knew her. She raised me. The words cost her more than she expected. She had not said them aloud to an outsider in her whole life. After my mother died, she took me in. She taught me everything. How to set a bone, how to read the sky, how to be strong enough that no one could ever take from us again. Her jaw worked. She was my grandmother. And your mother's amulet has been keeping me company since the winter I buried her. For a long moment, neither of them said anything. The wind moved through the mouth of the canyon and stirred the dust around the beaten men's abandoned gear. A hawk turned somewhere high overhead. She saved my mother, Cole said at last, quiet as a prayer. And you're standing here wearing the proof of it. 10 years I've been guessing at how big this country is, and it turns out it's small enough to put the 2 of us in the 50 feet of dirt. Don't. Nasha's grip on the amulet did not loosen. Don't make it a sign. Don't make it fate. A stone got lost and a stone got found. 2 people who lost their mothers ended up on the same trail. That's all it is, maybe. He did not push, but it changes what stands between us some, doesn't it? You're not turning away a stranger anymore. You're turning away the son of a woman your grandmother chose to save. I figure your grandmother would have something to say about that choice if she were here to say it. The words landed exactly where he must have known they would. Nasha felt the old anger rise up hot in her throat, the anger she used to cover everything softer and more dangerous underneath it. You do not get to speak for my dead, Lo. Dangerous. You did not know her. You knew a story your mother told you on her way out of the world. No, Cole agreed, and he did not flinch from her fury, did not step back the way every sensible man would have. I didn't know her. But I know she looked at a dying white woman she had every reason to leave in the dirt, and she chose mercy instead. That much I know for certain, because I'm the proof of it. My whole life is, he held her eyes. So I'll ask you the same thing she must have asked herself all those years ago. Are the children on the other side of this canyon worth less than the fear of what I might do with the path? Nasha had no answer for that. Or she had one, and she hated it, and she was not ready to say it out loud to a man she had known for the length of a single morning. She opened her mouth to send him back regardless. Fate and grandmothers and dying children be damned. And that was the exact moment the scream tore across the canyon. It came from deep in the passage. A woman's scream, high and ragged, cut off short by a sound like the mountain clearing its throat. A grinding, tumbling roar of stone giving way. Cole was moving before his mind had finished telling his body to. He dropped the water skin and reached for the rifle on his saddle, out of pure instinct. But Nasha was already gone, already running toward the sound, faster than any woman her size had any right to move, and he abandoned the rifle and the horses and everything else, and ran after her into the throat of the canyon. They found it 60 yards in, where the walls pinched close and the light went blue and thin. A slide of rock had come down off the eastern face, and it had come down on 2 people. A young man pinned from the waist down beneath a spill of broken stone, conscious but going gray at the lips, and an older woman half buried beside him, her leg bent at an angle that turned Cole's stomach even from 10 feet off, her eyes open but wrong. One pupil blown wide and dark. Chato. Nasha breathed the name like it had been punched out of her, and she dropped to her knees at the young man's side. Her hands flew over the rocks, pinning him, testing weight, testing what would hold and what would kill if it shifted. Don't move. Don't try to pull free. Not an inch. Do you hear me? Hurts. Chato's teeth were clenched hard around the word. The grandmother. Check the grandmother, cousin, please. But Cole was already there, crouched at the older woman's side, 2 fingers at the pulse below her jaw. It was there. Fast and thready, but there. The leg was broken plainly, badly. Yet it was not the leg that pulled his mouth into a hard, flat line. It was the gray creeping into her lips, and the way one eye had gone wide while the other had not. "She's hit her head," he said. And he kept his voice flat and useful, stripped of everything that would not help. "That's the thing that'll kill her, not the leg. We need to get her clear now. But we move wrong. We bring the rest of this face down on both of them." Nasha looked at him across the 2 trapped bodies, and in that single instant every scrap of the wall between them simply fell away. There was no warning now. No woman, no man was strong enough for her. No stranger with a debt and a dead mother. There were only 2 people who happened to both know how to move, when everyone else in the world would have frozen. "You said field medicine." It was half question, half command. Enough of it. Enough to know she can't wait. "Then tell me how to move this without killing them." He read the slide the way he read everything, fast and cold, the grim arithmetic of what could still be saved and what could not. That big one, there, across her hips. That's the one holding her down. We lift it together, on my count. You take the weight, you're stronger than me, and there's no shame in either of us saying so. I pull her clear the second there's room. The boy's worse. Those stones on him are holding each other up. We pull the wrong one. The whole pile drops. We do second and slow. But she goes now. Nasha set herself against the largest boulder, wedged her shoulder beneath its worst edge. And Cole saw the one thing all the stories about her had never once accounted for. Her hands were shaking, barely, but shaking all the same. Because this was not the abstract tribe she had sworn her whole life to guard. This was Chato, who she had likely known since he could walk. This was the grandmother of her own dead grandmother's people. This was blood, bleeding out in the cold blue dirt in front of her, and blood made even a wall tremble. "On 3, Cole said, sliding both hands beneath the old woman's shoulders. 1, 2, 3, Nasha lifted. The muscles in her arms and back stood out like braided rope, veins rising sharp beneath the skin, and the boulder ground upward with a sound like the earth itself complaining at being asked. For the length of one held breath, nothing else moved. Then Cole hauled the unconscious grandmother backward out of the gap, just as Nasha's strength finally gave, and the boulder crashed back down into the dirt with a force that would have flattened anything left beneath it. They both went down hard, breathing ragged, the old woman lying between them in the dust, alive, broken in ways it would take days to fully measure. But alive, Nasha was already turning toward her cousin. "Chato, hold on, we're coming for you now." "No," Cole caught her arm, and felt the coiled power in it and the barely leashed panic beneath the power. "Not like that. Those stones are a puzzle, and we solve it wrong. We kill him. We shore the gaps first, wedge them so they can't drop. Then we take them one at a time, slow, from the top. He's stable, he's talking. We rush this out of fear. We cause bleeding in those legs we won't be able to stop out here. You know I'm right." She did know. He could see the war of it play out behind her eyes. Instinct against intelligence. The heart screaming to dig, and the head knowing better. It was the same fight he had watched tear men apart on a dozen bad nights. Finally she gave a single hard nod, furious at the truth of it but bending to it all the same. "Then get your supplies. Whatever you've got in those packs to brace with." Fast, Cole ran back through the passage for the horses, and as he ran, some cold, quiet corner of his mind snagged on a thing he had no time yet to think through. Rock in a canyon like this did not just let go. That eastern face had held its place for 1,000 years and more. It did not choose this one morning, this 1 hour, to spill down on the exact 2 people who happened to be standing beneath it. Something had helped it along, but there was no time to chase the thought. There was only a crushed young man, and a fading grandmother, and a woman with shaking hands who had, without either of them naming it, just started letting him pass the first stone of a wall she had spent 10 years building. They worked in the failing blue light of the passage until the boy came free. It took the better part of an hour. Cole wedged his saddleboards and a folded length of canvas into the gaps between the stones, bracing the pile so it could not drop, while Nasha lifted each rock away from the top in the exact order he named. She never once argued the order after that first time it lawed. She had watched him be right, and she was not a woman who needed to be shown a truth twice. When Chato slid loose at last, his legs were crushed badly enough that Cole knew the road back for him would be long and far from certain. But the bleeding was slow, not the killing kind, and the boy was breathing, and out in that country breathing was a victory a man learned to be grateful for. Nasha gathered her cousin up in her arms, as though he weighed no more than a child. There was a gentleness in it that made a plain liar out of every story the territory had ever told about her. Cole took the grandmother, cradling her head against his chest to keep it still, and together they carried the wounded back through the throat of the canyon toward a camp he had not known sat so close. As they walked, he became aware of eyes in the dusk. Other people, moving in the shadows along the walls, watching, weighing, measuring this outsider who carried one of their own. They will want you gone, Nasha said quietly. The moment these two are stable, they will demand I send you back the way you came, will you? She did not answer right away. When she did, her voice carried a weight that changed the air between them. I don't know anymore. You could have run when the rock came down. Most men would have. You stayed, and you knew how to save them. And now I owe you something I did not ask to owe. Didn't do it for a debt, I know. She shifted Chato higher against her shoulder. That is exactly what makes it hard. The camp sat tucked into a protected fold of the canyon where the walls curved back on themselves. Traditional structures stood among a few more permanent ones, all of it hidden from the country beyond by 100 feet of stone. People came out of the dark as they approached, and their faces shifted from worry to open shock the instant they saw who walked among them carrying their wounded. An older man stepped forward. His face was carved deep with years and the kind of quiet authority that never once needed to raise its voice. Nasha, what is this? This is the man who helped me pull Chato and the grandmother out from under a slide. Itza. Without him, they would both be dead in the passage right now. She paused, and something crossed her face, and Cole realized she was only now understanding how strange the next part would sound. And his mother was saved by my grandmother years ago, before either of us drew breath. He carries her amulet, or I do. It is a long story, and these two do not have time for it. Itza's eyes moved from her to Cole and back again, slow and unforgiving. He had led this band longer than Nasha had been alive. He had buried too many of his people to hand his trust to anything that arrived at sundown wearing a settler's boots and a debt he could not verify. We do not allow outsiders here. He is already here, Nasha said, and an edge came into her voice that Cole was beginning to know, the edge she used to defend. And the grandmother has a head wound that he understands and I do not. We can argue the rules after we argue about whether she lives until morning. Cole watched the silent contest of wills play out between them, watched the other band members shift on their feet, caught between gratitude for the two lives in their arms and a lifetime of good reasons never to trust a face like his. One night, Itza said at last, and the words came out like they were being pulled from him against the grain. You tend the wounded, you leave before the sun clears the rim, and you never speak of this place, not to one living soul, for as long as you draw breath. Agreed, Cole said, before Nasha could complicate it. They carried the injured into a low structure lit by a banked fire, and Cole went to work. He cleaned wounds and set bone and mixed what he carried in his packs with the herbs. Nasha pressed into his hands without being asked twice. She anticipated him at every turn, and he began to understand that one night was never going to be enough. Not to make sense of the grandmother's head wound, which he could stabilize but not truly heal, and not to make sense of the woman working beside him, whose hands could shatter a grown man or cradle a dying one with the very same terrible ease. Somewhere past the deepest part of the night, when the grandmother's breathing had steadied into something Cole trusted, and Chato had finally slipped into a fevered sleep, Nasha stepped out of the smoke and the blood to breathe air that did not smell of either. Cole followed a few minutes later. He found her standing at the edge of the firelight, looking out at the black canyon walls. That slide, he said. Careful, quiet, because the thing that had snagged in his mind hours ago had not once let go. I've been turning it over since it happened. That eastern face didn't come down on its own. She went very still. I've seen what powder does to stone, Cole went on. I've used it, blasting for wells and grading roads. And when I ran back for the horses, there was a smell hanging in that passage that had no business being there. Bitter, burnt. I know it, the way you know the smell of blood. He met her eyes. Somebody set a charge in your canyon. Somebody wanted that rock to come down. For a long moment, Nasha said nothing. She looked back toward the dark mouth of the passage, toward the sacred ground she had bled and starved and gone without sleep to protect for a full third of her life. And Cole watched 10 years of hard certainty crack straight down the middle, because if he was right, then everything she had built had been aimed at the wrong enemy. She had braced her whole adult life for men who came at the passage from the front. Armed, loud, easy to read and easier to turn back. She had never once braced for men who would open the mountain from underneath and let the falling earth do the killing for them. If you are right, she said slowly, then this was not settlers looking for a way through. Settlers want to cross. They do not want to bring the walls down, no. This is somebody who wants the canyon itself. Bad enough to blow it open. Bad enough not to care one bit who happens to be standing in it when it goes. She closed her fist around the amulet at her throat, and when she spoke again, her voice had dropped to something low and hard and terribly certain. Then, whoever they are, they have just made the same mistake every man makes when he looks at this ground. They think it is theirs for the taking. Her knuckles went pale around the stone. It is not. And I am going to make them understand exactly how wrong they were. Dawn came to the canyon cold and gray and unforgiving. Cole had not slept. He had spent the night watching Chatto's chest rise and fall, checking the grandmother's eyes by the low fire every hour to see whether the two pupils had come back to matching. They had not, quite. But she breathed steady, and near morning Chatto's fever had climbed and then broken just enough to give hope a foothold. Cole thought that had been the hard part of the night. He was wrong. The hard part arrived with the light, in the form of raised voices outside the structure. He leaves, now. Before the sun is full on the rim, Itza. The old man who had granted them one night and not 1 minute past it. The grandmother has not woken. Nasha's voice, held level, but stretched thin as a drum skin. Chatto's fever could climb again by midday. They need care that he knows how to give and I do not. Then you give it. You watched him work the whole night. You have hands and eyes. You learned enough. I learned that field medicine is not the same as healing. I can set a bone. I cannot tell if the rot creeps into it 3 days from now. I cannot tell if the grandmother's head will ever let her open her eyes and know my face again. Cole came to the doorway quiet and looked out at the gathered band. 25, maybe, standing in a loose half-circle in the thin light. Nasha faced them alone, her back straight, her shoulders squared. A woman so used to standing between her people and the thing they feared that she did it, even when the thing Feetzer stood behind her, wearing his boots. When she saw him step out, something flickered across her face. He could not read all of it. Relief and frustration, tangled up together. I'll go, Cole said plain, before she could dig herself any deeper.
My word.
One night, medical help, then gone. A man's word doesn't mean much if it only holds when it's easy. Itza's face settled into a grim satisfaction. Nasha started to say something, and Cole cut her off not with a raised hand but with a look, and then he turned the whole thing sideways on her. Grandmother stays flat. Head raised a little on a folded blanket, no more. Check her eyes every few hours, and if the wide one starts to come back to match the other, that's good, that's her mending. Chatto's leg gets rewrapped twice a day, and the mixture I showed you fresh each time, not the old. His fever spikes, you use the willow bark, weak. Too strong and it turns his stomach and he loses the good of it. He was reciting medicine. But what he was truly doing, and what he watched her slowly understand he was doing, was handing her a way out. A list she could follow, instead of a choice she could not survive making in front of her whole band. Gratitude and something very like resentment warred openly across her face at the same moment. I will walk you to the edge of the canyon, she said stiffly. They gathered his supplies in a silence the whole band watched. When Nasha lifted his heavy medicine packs as though they held nothing but air, an older woman near the fire made a small sound of approval, and Cole caught the way Nasha's jaw tightened at the sound of it. Even here, even among her own people, even in the middle of grief, she felt the old pull to prove a strength that had been proven 10,000 times already. They walked without a word until the camp fell away behind a bend in the stone. Then she stopped. You did not have to do that. Do what? Make it easy for me. She would not quite look at him. Turn my choice into a list of instructions, so I did not have to be the one who chose. Let me pick duty over. She stopped. Over what? She turned, and the morning light caught the exhaustion carved deep into her face, the long night of fear for her own blood. Over wanting you to stay. There, I have said it. You can do with it what you like. The words hung raw in the cold air, and Cole felt something crack open in his chest that he had kept sealed shut for 3 years. I don't want to leave either. The truth of it surprised him with its weight, but there are children past that canyon burning up worse than Chateau ever did. They need the medicine more than I need to understand you. That much I know for sure. She looked away toward the rim where his horse was waited, and that was when the arithmetic he had been avoiding all morning finally caught up to him. If I ride now, he said slowly, working it out loud, I don't make it in time. I lost a night here. The route through your canyon was going to save me 2 full days. I go around now, that's 5 more days of hard travel. At the least, her expression changed. You are saying the children may die, the fever I described. The way it moves through the young ones, he did not finish. He did not have to. She looked toward the passage. Toward the sacred ground she had guarded against every comer for a third of her life. Then she looked back at him, and Cole watched her make a decision that rearranged the shape of everything. Then I am coming with you. What? Through the canyon. There are paths only my people walk, faster than the one you know. We cut a full day, maybe more. Her voice gathered strength as it went, the way a river gathers it coming down off a mountain. But I come with you. I see these sick children with my own eyes. I put my own hands on their fevers and know they are real. And I make certain, every mile of the way, that you keep your word about this place. Now and for the rest of your life, Itza won't. Itza does not own me. Fire lit her from somewhere deep. I am not a horse my band gets to trade or hobble. If I choose to ride out beside an outsider and hold him to his word with my own eyes, that is my choice, and no one else's. Cole searched her face for a hidden angle. For some second reason, underneath the stated one, he found only iron, and beneath the iron, something he did not dare name out loud. Hope, maybe. Or the same pull that had been dragging at his own chest since the moment she turned her back on him and called him strong enough to try. It'll be dangerous, he said. Not just the trail. The settlement might not want an Apache woman riding in with the medicine. I am not asking to be wanted. I have never once been wanted anywhere I go. I am asking one thing only. She held his eyes. Do you trust me enough to let me come? And he understood the question was far larger than the miles between here and there. She was asking whether he saw her as a threat or an ally, as a weapon or a partner, as the wall her people needed her to be, or the woman she had let him glimpse for half a heartbeat in the blue dark of the passage. I trust you, Cole said, and he meant it all the way down to the ground. Completely. She nodded once, decisive. Then we leave within the hour. I have to tell Itza, and I have to make sure someone here can carry on with the grandmother and Chato without me. The argument with Itza was short, and it was brutal. Nasha stood in the center of camp with her few belongings already bundled, facing down the man who had helped raise her after her grandmother took on the greater part of it. His weathered face was tight with anger, and beneath the anger sat something that looked uncomfortably close to fear. You would abandon your duty for a stranger. I would honor my grandmother's memory by seeing that medicine reaches dying children. That is exactly what she would have done. It is what she did do, once. For a white woman she had every reason to leave in the dirt. Nasha's voice held level. And I would protect this place by making sure this man keeps his silence. With my own eyes. All the way there and all the way back, you protect this place by keeping outsiders out. Not by riding away at their side. He already knows where we are. That cannot be undone. She shouldered her pack. The only thing left in the world for me to control is what he does with what he knows. So I am going to go and control it. And the charge in the passage, Itza's voice dropped. You would ride off and leave your people with an enemy who blows the mountain down on our heads. That gave her pause, and Cole saw it cost her. But she did not bend. Post watchers at the Narrows, day and night. Anyone comes near the walls with a pack mule and a length of fuse, you will see them long before they can light it. I taught half of these people to move quiet through that passage. Use them. She met the old man's eyes. I will be gone 7 days, 8 at the most. The grandmother and Chateau will be stable by the time I return, and I will bring back the name of whoever set that charge. if I can find it. That is worth more to our safety than one more body standing at the mouth of the canyon. And if you do not return at all, the question landed heavy in the cold morning. Nasha met his stare without a single flinch. Then you will know I died keeping our people safe. Is that not the very thing you raised me to be willing to do? She walked away before he could find an answer, before the guilt could sink its hooks deep enough to hold her in place. Cole waded past the edge of the camp with both horses. His face gave away nothing. His eyes, as always, gave away too much. Rough, I will survive it. I have survived worse from that man. They rode into the canyon single file, Nasha in the lead. The walls narrowed as they went, until the stone pinched so close that Cole had to turn sideways in the saddle to fit through the throat of the passage. The rock rose sheer on both sides, throwing them into a permanent blue shadow that never once saw the sun. She moved through the maze without hesitation, never pausing at the forks and splits that would have swallowed him whole inside a single minute. But she slowed once, near a deep fold in the western wall, where the shadows pooled darkest. Because that was where the smell lived, Cole caught it the same instant she did. Faint, acrid, the ghost of black powder still clinging to cold stone hours after the fact. Nasha swung down without a word and crouched at the base of the rock face. She ran her fingertips along a crack that ran too straight and too clean to be the work of any winter frost. When she drew her hand back, the tips of her fingers had come away dusted a dark and oily gray. She held them up to the thin light. You were right. This was drilled, packed, lit. Her voice had gone flat and dangerous. The rock that came down on Shadow and the grandmother did not fall. It was pushed. How many charges you figure they set? This one brought down the eastern face. But a man does not blast once and walk away satisfied. She stood, and now she read the walls with an entirely new kind of eye. The eye of a woman who had just learned her enemy did not fight the way she had spent a decade preparing for. They are testing the mountain, learning how much of it they will have to break to open a road wide enough for wagons. There's nothing through here worth a road, Cole said. Just your land and hard country past it. That is exactly what makes the road worth killing for. The words came out of her like a curse. This passage is the only cut through these mountains wide enough to run freight. A man who owns this canyon owns every road west of here. Every load of supplies bound for the mining camps. Every ounce of trade that moves between the settlements and the diggings. She looked back the way they had come, toward her hidden people. My grandmother warned me the settlers would come with rifles. She lived long enough to be right about that 100 times over. She never once thought to warn me they would come with dynamite and a company ledger. Cole studied her in the blue dark. You keep saying they. Like you've got a face in mind? I have too many faces in mind. 10 years of them. She wiped the powder residue off on her leggings, slow, deliberate, like she was cleaning a wound. Men who came to the passage and left angry. Men who offered my band trinkets for the right to cross and rode off cursing when I turned them down. Any one of them could have gone to somebody with money and a grudge that outlasted their pride. She swung back up into the saddle. But it does not matter which face it is yet. What matters is that whoever paid for this powder is not a stop at one slide. And every day I spend riding to your settlement is a day my people are exposed. Then why come at all? Cole asked, gentle. You could turn back right now. Nobody would fault you. She looked at him for a long moment, and something moved behind her eyes that she did not put into words. Because a debt is a debt, she said finally. Your grandmother, my grandmother, she did not weigh whether saving your mother was convenient. She just did the thing that was right and let the cost fall where it fell. She nudged her horse forward into the dark. I would like to be that kind of strong, just once, before I go back to being the other kind. After 3 hours, the canyon opened without warning into a valley Cole had never known existed, a hidden stretch of grassland, fed by some underground spring, green in stubborn defiance of the hard country pressing in on every side. The change was so sudden it stole his breath. One moment the blue stone walls, cold and close. The next open sky and living grass, and the small silver music of water moving over rock. We water the horses here, Nasha said, swinging down with that fluid ease that never stopped surprising him in a body her size. Then we cut northeast through the ridge. That is the stretch that saves us the day. Cole slid from his own saddle, legs stiff from the long, tense navigation. He watched her lead both horses to the spring, watched her check each animal's legs and hooves with practiced care before she let either of them drink. Everything she did carried the same signature. Power that never moved without first knowing exactly where it was going. "You're staring," she said without turning around. "Observing, there is a difference?" "Usually none." He crouched at the spring and splashed the cold water over his face, and it shocked his skin awake after the long night and the longer morning. "With you, maybe some. I'm trying to work out how somebody this strong ended up this alone." Her face closed like a door swung shut. "I am not alone. I have my band. I have people to protect. That's not the same as having people who know you. Protecting folks and being known by them, those are two different rivers." He straightened, water dripping from his jaw. "Back at the passage you said I saw you as a person, which means most of the people around you don't. Not even your own. They see what they need to see." She would not look at him. A wall, a weapon. A thing that stands between them and the men who would take everything. "It is what I am to them, and I stopped minding that a long time ago. What about what you need?" The question clearly caught her flat-footed. She stared at him a moment, something working behind her eyes. "What I need does not enter into it. My band needs a defender, so I am a defender. That is the whole arithmetic of my life, and it balances fine. That's what you became for them," Cole said, gentle. "But who are you when nobody's watching? When you don't have to be anyone's wall for a single hour?" She looked toward the ridge where their path climbed on. "I don't know anymore. Maybe I never did." The admission cost her. He could see it in the set of her shoulders, the way she braced as though honesty were a blow she expected to be struck for. And Cole, who had spent 3 years running from every quiet moment that might make him feel the size of what he'd lost, recognized the flinch. He knew it from the inside, so he sat down in the grass near the spring, not close enough to crowd her, and he waited. He had learned that some things could not be pulled out of a person. They had to be let out, in their own time, once the person decided the ground was safe enough. "When I was 15, Nasha said at last, and she said it to the water, and not to him, I was smaller than the boys my age, weaker. They made very sure I never forgot it the way boys do, so I trained. I pushed until my muscles tore, and my hands split open and bled into the dirt, and then I pushed past that. I got strong because I had to, not because I ever once wanted to. There is a difference, and no one who was handed their strength ever understands it. And then you became the strongest, and then everyone needed something from it. Old bitterness roughened the words. Protect us, fight for us, stand between us and everything out there that means us harm. Be the wall. Nobody ever once asked whether I was tired, whether I wanted a different kind of life, a husband maybe, children of my own. They just needed me strong, so that is the only thing I let myself be. I put the rest of it away where it could not slow me down. Who are you? Then Cole asked again, quiet. Underneath all of that, she was silent a long while. The horses drank. A hawk turned overhead the same as the morning before, or maybe a different one. There was no way to know. There is more to it, she finally said. More than the boys and the taunting. There is a reason my grandmother raised me, and not my mother. There is a reason I built the wall so high, and manned it alone for 10 years and never once let a soul climb up beside me. Her jaw worked. And it is not a story I have told anyone. Not Itza. Not my own people. Not the men who fear me. You don't have to tell me. I know I don't. She finally turned and looked at him, and there was something raw and frightened in her face that he doubted she had let anyone see in a decade. That is exactly why I think I might. Because you are not asking me to. Everyone else in my life has only ever wanted the strong part of me. You are the first person who has ever seemed to want the rest. She drew a slow breath. But not here, not in the daylight. Some things can only be said in the dark, when you cannot see the other person's face change while you say them. Cole nodded. He understood that better than she could have known. His own worst truths had only ever come out at night, spoken low to a dying fire. Then tonight, he said, when we make camp. If you still want to, if I still have the courage, you mean. A thin, tired ghost of a smile crossed her face, there and gone. We will see whether I do. They mounted up and rode toward the far edge of the hidden valley, toward the ridge and the long climb waiting past it. And Cole found himself thinking that he had stopped, somewhere back in that blue passage, treating this as a simple errand of mercy with a strange guide attached. It had become something else. A chance, an opening. The dangerous, half-buried, Hope that he had finally found an other soul who understood what it was to carry a weight too heavy to set down, and who might, given enough dark and enough courage, be willing to share it for a little while. They made camp that night in the shelter of a rock overhang. A fire burned down to red coals between them, the ridge looming black against the stars ahead. And when the dark had settled deep enough to make confession feel possible, Nasha kept her word. "You asked who I am when no one is watching," she said, staring into the embers. "I will tell you, but you will not look at me the same after. So look at me now, while you still can. Try me." She was quiet a long moment. Then it came out of her in a low, steady voice, the voice of someone who has told a story to themselves 10,000 times in the dark and never once said it aloud. "When I was 15, a man came to our camp. Not one of ours. A trader, half-starved, alone. He said he had been robbed on the trail, that his partners had turned on him and left him for the coyotes. He begged for shelter. Just a few nights, he said, until he had strength enough to walk out on his own 2 feet. Cole did not move. He had learned that the smallest interruption could close a person back up like a fist. The elders wanted to turn him out. Strangers meant risk. It had always been so, and they were not wrong." Her jaw tightened. "But I was the one who found him. Out past the water, curled up in the rocks like a dying animal. And when I knelt down beside him, he looked at me. Really looked. Not up at me the way men do now, measuring whether they can take me. He looked at me like I was a girl worth being kind to. I was 15, and he was the first person outside my own family who ever had. So, you spoke for him." I spoke for him. The words came out like they had teeth. I stood in front of the elders and I said he was harmless. I said we should show him mercy. The same mercy my grandmother had shown to a dying white woman years before. I used her own example against them. And they listened. Because I had already begun to be someone worth listening to. My strength was starting to mean something, and I spent it all on a stranger's word. The fire popped. A coal shifted and settled. He stayed 3 nights. And in 3 nights he learned everything. Our numbers. Our paths through the rocks. Where the water was and where the guards stood, and more to the point, where they did not. Her voice had gone hollow, scraped down to the bone. On the 4th night he slipped out while the camp slept. I thought he had simply gone. I was even sad about it. God help me. I thought I had done a good thing and lost a friend for it. She drew a breath that shook at the edges. He came back on the 5th night, and he brought 11 armed men with him. Cole's hands had gone still in his lap. They came at dawn. When we were slowest, when the fires were low and the watch was tired, my mother died in the first minute. I did not even see it happen. My grandmother threw me down behind the water skins and lay her whole body over mine so they would take us for dead already. Nash's eyes were dry, which was somehow worse than tears. We lived. The 2 of us. 14 others did not. 14, Cole. My mother among them. Because a 15-year-old girl saw a man look at her with kindness and decided that meant the whole world could be trusted. For a long time, neither of them said anything. The fire ticked. The wind moved along the ridge above. But here is the thing that neither of them said aloud that night, though it sat between them in the dark as real as the fire. Because saying it would have made it too heavy to carry any further. Nasha had spent 10 years believing the massacre was her fault alone. That her soft young heart was the blade that killed her mother. She had never once let herself wonder whether the traitor who sold them out might still be alive somewhere in this wide country. Still breathing. Still trading other people's trust for coin, the way some men trade horses. She had buried that question along with her mother, because some questions are too dangerous to ask when you cannot survive the shape of the answer. "Now you understand the wall," she said finally. "I did not build it to keep men out. I built it so I would never again be the reason my people bled. Every man I turn away at that passage, every one I put in the dust before he can say 3 soft words to me, is a man who cannot do to us what that traitor did. That is not cruelty. It is penance. I am paying for 14 graves, and I will be paying until I am in one of my own." "That's not penance," Cole said, and his voice came low and rough. "That's a girl of 15 taking on a debt that belonged to 11 armed men and the murderer who led them to your door. You didn't kill your people. He did. You showed mercy, and a wicked man used your mercy as a weapon. Those aren't the same thing, and if you can't see the daylight between them, then that traitor took more from you than 14 lives. He took the rest of yours too." Nasha looked at him across the coals, and for a moment her face was that of a 15-year-old girl again, hoping against everything she had learned that someone might tell her it was not her fault. You cannot know that. I know it the way I know powder from perfume. I've buried people I couldn't save. My sister, when I was 14. My mother, 3 years back. And I spent a long time believing if I'd just been faster, smarter, stronger, they'd have lived. He held her eyes across the fire. Grief tells you it was your fault because your fault is something you can control. And control feels better than the truth, which is that sometimes the world just takes, and there was never one single thing you could have done. You built a wall so you'd never feel that helpless again. I got on a horse and I've been riding ever since. Different walls. Same reason. She stared at him a long moment. You are the first person, she said quietly, who has ever heard that story and not looked at me like I was either a monster or a fool. That's because you're neither. You're just somebody who's been carrying a grave on her back so long, she forgot it was ever allowed to be set down. The ridge the next morning was worse than Cole had reckoned on, not dangerous in the way of predators or rock slides. Dangerous in the slower way of pure exhaustion. Narrow footing that demanded constant attention. Steep climbs that tested the horses to the ragged edge of what they had. Thin air that made every breath fall a little short of enough. They climbed for 7 hours, and the sun had begun its long slide west when Nasha's horse stumbled. The animal caught itself. But the moment of lost footing on the loose rock sent a spray of stones cascading down the slope behind them, and Nasha was on the ground before the last of them settled. Her hands running down the horse's foreleg with a focused intensity, strained, her jaw tightened. Not bad yet. But it will be if we push her the rest of the way up carrying my weight. Cole checked the angle of the sun, ran the distance in his head. Can't camp here. No water. No cover worth the name. Too exposed if that weather building to the north decides to come our way. I know all that frustration rang in every line of her. But I will not ruin a good horse over a deadline. She has carried me faithful for 6 years, wasn't asking you to ruin her. He swung down and stood a moment thinking, we double up on mine. Lead yours empty, let her walk it off. It's slower, adds maybe 4 hours to the climb. But we clear the ridge by full dark and your horse walks into camp instead of getting carried. Nasha looked at his horse, then at him, and Cole watched her run the plain logistics of it against everything unspoken that had been building between them since the hidden valley, since the fire, since the confession. 2 people, saddle. Hours of bodies pressed close on a narrow trail. Unless you've got a better idea, he added. I do not. She began stripping the packs off her own horse to lighten its load for the walk. Yours is strong enough to carry us both up a grade like this. He's carried heavier through worse. Cavalry remount, before I bought him out. He's got more bottom than sense. When she mounted up behind him a few minutes later, arms coming around his waist to hold her balance on the climb, Cole felt the tension in every single point where they touched. She held herself carefully apart, trying to keep some border of air between his back and her chest, trying to make the necessity into something less than it was. It lasted maybe 10 minutes. Then the trail steepened and turned hard against a shoulder of rock, and the horse lurched, and the border collapsed. She was forced against his back, forced to trust his balance and the animal's footing, forced to stop treating the closeness like a thing to be managed, and simply let it be what it was. You're going to crack a rib holding yourself that stiff, Cole said over his shoulder. I am fine. You're rigid as a fence rail. Horse shifts wrong at the wrong moment. You throw us both down this slope. Relax into it or we both go over. He felt her start to argue and he cut it off before it could gather steam. I'm not going to read a thing into this that isn't there. It's a horse and a hard climb. You can breathe, Nasha. Slow. By inches. He felt her let go. Felt her body find the horse's rhythm instead of fighting against it. Felt her arms settle into something natural around his middle. And despite everything he had just said about not reading into it, Cole was aware of every breath she took, warm against the back of his shoulder, in a way that had nothing to do with the trail. Can I ask you something, she said, close to his ear. Sure. Why have you never settled? Built something that stays put? You move like a man who has been running a long time from something with no legs. The question cut close to the bone. Maybe I have been. From what? He guided the horse around a shelf of loose scree before he answered, giving himself the time. from standing still long enough to feel the whole size of what I lost. Moving always had a purpose. Bring medicine here, carry supplies there, help where the helping was needed. As long as I was moving, I was useful, and useful is a fine thing to hide behind. He paused. Standing still just meant sitting in a quiet room with everybody who wasn't there anymore. My sister, my mother. So I didn't stand still. For 3 years I didn't stand still, and now I'm starting to think maybe some things are worth standing still for. Worth sitting in the quiet room, if the right person's sitting in it too. He felt her breath catch against his back. Felt her arms tighten. Just slightly, just once. You asked me a hard question by the fire last night, Cole said, keeping his voice light against the weight of what he was circling. Only fair I ask you one back. Why'd you really come with me? The true reason, not the one about holding me to my word. You could have sent 3 watchers to do that. She was silent. So long he thought she had decided not to answer at all. When she finally spoke, it was barely above the wind moving over the ridge, because I was tired of being strong alone, because when you look at me I feel seen instead of used, and I had forgotten there was a difference until you reminded me of it. Because for the first time in 10 years I wanted something for myself, instead of only ever doing what everyone else needed me to do. A pause, and because you heard the worst thing I have ever done, and you did not flinch, and I wanted to see if I could stand to be near a person like that, just for a few days, just to know what it feels like. And what does it feel like? Terrifying, she said, and then softer, her forehead coming to rest for one brief moment against the back of his shoulder, a gesture so simple and so total it made his chest ache. And like setting down something I have carried so long, I forgot my back could ever be straight without it. They rode on in a silence after that, but it was not an uncomfortable one. It was the kind of quiet that comes from being understood. From 2 people who have each spent too long carrying a weight alone, finally discovering that sharing it, even for an hour, even on a hard climb up a nameless ridge, feels less like weakness than like the first easy breath after a long time drowning. They cleared the ridge as the sun bled toward the horizon, and the country on the far side changed under them as they descended. Harder, drier, and everywhere now, the signs of men, old wagon ruts cut into the hardpan, the black bones of a burned-out homestead. And then, driven into the ground beside the trail, a wooden stake with a strip of faded red cloth knotted to its top. Nasha slid down off the horse to look at it, and she went cold in a way Cole felt through his own back. A survey marker. She had seen enough of them to know exactly what she was looking at. They have been all through this country, measuring it, claiming it in advance. She pulled the stake up out of the ground and turned it in her hands. This is not near your settlement. This is a full day's ride from my canyon. Which means the man who wants my passage does not want only my passage. The understanding settled over Cole slow and cold. He wants the whole corridor, every mile of it. Which means the ground your settlement sits on may be marked too. She dropped the stake in the dirt. Your sick children in my sacred canyon may be threads in the very same rope. Pulled by the very same hand, they rode into the settlement in the last of the light, and it was not at all what Nasha had pictured. She had imagined canvas and desperation, something rough and temporary. Instead, they came into a cluster of permanent buildings arranged around a central square. Small, isolated, but built by people who meant to stay. The place moved with the ease of routine until the riders were spotted. Then everything stopped at once. Doors opened, faces turned, and Cole felt Nasha go rigid behind him on the horse, because her Apache clothing left no room for anyone to mistake what she was. A man stepped out of the largest building, weathered, watchful, a rifle held easy but present in the crook of his arm. Behind him others gathered, 40 souls, maybe, faces running the whole range from open curiosity to something a great deal harder. Cole Barrett. Recognition cleared some of the suspicion from the man's face. Didn't rightly believe you'd make it back in time. We near enough gave you up. Had help, Samuel. Cole swung down and turned to help Nasha, though she plainly did not need it. This is Nasha. She brought me through paths that cut 2 days off the ride. Without her, there's no medicine and there's no me. Whatever you think when you look at her, you owe her your children's lives. Before she said a word, Samuel Hart's eyes moved from Cole to Nasha and back again. Apache? Yes. Nasha met his stare without a flicker. Apache, and if your children are burning with the fever he described, They do not care one bit who carries the medicine that saves them. Fever has never once asked a child what people it belongs to. A woman shoved through the crowd, her face gaunt with fear and too many nights without sleep. My daughter's burning up. My boys stopped taking water yesterday morning. I don't care if the help comes from an Apache or the devil himself in a preacher's coat. I want my children to live to see the summer. Let them through, Samuel, for God's sake. The tension shifted, but it did not break. Hart looked between the desperate mother and Nasha's unbending stance, weighing something Cole could not see. The medicine is what we need, Hart said carefully. Not trouble. And an Apache in this square is a kind of trouble whether she means to be or not. Then don't make any, Cole said, and an edge slid into his voice that had not been there before. We're here to help. That is the whole of it. Show us the sick, and let the rest of it wait. But Nasha was no longer listening to any of them, because her eyes had snagged on a figure standing at the back of the crowd. A man leaning against a post at the corner of the largest building. Older now, grayer than her memory of him. But the shape of him, the particular tilt of his head, the way he stood like a man always half a step from bolting for the door. Her whole body turned to ice, because she knew that man. She had seen him exactly once before in her life, 10 years ago, half-starved and alone, and begging for shelter at the edge of her camp. The traitor she had spoken for, the stranger she had trusted with her whole young heart, the one who had slipped away on the 4th night and come back on the 5th with 11 armed men and left 14 of her people cold in the dawn. He was here, alive, standing in a settlement square 100 miles from where he had buried her mother, and he was watching her with the flat, calculating eyes of a man who had spent his whole life working for whoever paid him best. Nasha's hand drifted toward the knife at her belt, before her mind had caught up to her body, and the man saw it, saw her recognize him, and a slow, ugly understanding spread across his gray face, because here was the thing the survey stake had been trying to tell her. The man who wanted her sacred ground had not hired some faceless stranger to blow it open. He had hired the one man in all this territory who already knew the answer to every question worth asking, every hidden path, every water source, every weakness in her canyon's defense. He had hired the ghost she had buried alongside her mother 10 years ago and never once let herself believe was still breathing. And that ghost had a name now, spoken low by someone in the crowd as he pushed off the post and straightened. Emmett Doyle, the gun who rode for the man behind the survey stakes. The old grief and the new enemy folded together into one single unbearable shape. And Nasha understood, standing in the dying light of a square full of dying children, that this had never truly been Cole's fight she had wandered into. It was hers. It had always been hers. She simply had not known it until this exact moment, Nasha. Cole's voice reached her as if from the far end of a long tunnel. The children. We have to move now, or we're going to lose the little ones. She dragged her eyes off Doyle, forced her hand away from the knife, one finger at a time, because there were children dying behind that door, and whatever the man across the square owed her, it would keep one more night. She had waited 10 years to collect it. She could wait until the fevers broke, but her voice, when it came, was pitched low enough that only Cole could hear it. That gray man, against the post at the corner. Do not look at him. What about him? He is the reason my mother is in the ground. Her hand closed white-knuckled around the strap of Cole's medicine pack. And before I leave this place, he is going to answer for every single grave he dug. But not tonight. Tonight we save the children. Show me the sick, Cowboy. They led her and Cole to a building that had been turned into a rough infirmary. 7 children lay on cots inside. The youngest maybe 5 years old, the oldest barely into her teens. And the smell hit Nasha the moment she crossed the threshold. Fever, sweat. The sour, particular reek of sickness tipping toward the grave when no one steps in to stop its fall. She had smelled it before, in her own camp, on a cold dawn that ended 14 lives. She pushed the memory down hard, because it was the only way through this, one thing at a time. Children first. The ghost against the post could wait. Cole moved among the cots fast, and Nasha watched a different man take shape in front of her. Not the still, patient rider from the ridge, a worker. Pulse, skin, eyes, breathing, each child read in a matter of seconds the same cold arithmetic he had run on the rock slide, now run on small bodies. It's the fever, I thought. He looked up at her, grim. Further along than I hoped for. We get the medicine into all of them before full dark, or we lose the two youngest by morning. Those two," he nodded at the smallest boy and the 5-year-old girl. "They're the ones fighting the hardest and losing. Tell me what you need." They worked side by side as the light failed. Cole, mixing what he carried with water, boiled over the infirmary fire, measuring doses by a care that came from having watched the wrong dose kill. Nasha holding thrashing children still with hands, strong enough to keep them from hurting themselves and gentle enough not to bruise. Explaining timing to frightened parents in a low, steady voice, and she felt eyes on her the entire time. Settlers crowded at the door and the windows, watching an Apache woman lay her hands on their sick. The desperate mother from the square came to her while Cole was across the room, bent over the boy. "Why are you helping us?" Nasha did not look up from the girl she was cooling with a damp cloth. "Because they need it." "Does there have to be a second reason under the first? Your people and mine. We're not exactly friends. My husband lost a brother to a raid, years back. He'd sooner spit on you than thank you." "No. We are not friends." Nasha pressed the cloth to the child's forehead. "But your daughter is not your people, and she is not mine. She is a child with a fever, and I have watched children burn before. I know exactly what it takes out of you, standing there, unable to cool them fast enough." Her voice roughened. "I would not wish that helplessness on any mother alive. Not even one whose husband would spit on me." The woman's face softened by a degree. She reached out and touched Nasha's forearm for just a second, wordless, and then went back to her daughter's cot. As the last light drained from the windows, Cole pulled Nasha aside, and his face carried the news before his mouth did. "There's a problem. The two little ones aren't turning. The medicine's taking hold in the older 5. Not in them." He dragged a hand through his hair. "They need somebody watching them all night. Temperatures checked, doses adjusted by the hour, fluids kept up. I can hold 3, maybe 4 children through a night like that. Not 7. Not this far gone. I need skilled hands beside me or we lose the babies. I can help, I know you can." He glanced toward the settlers still gathered at the door. "But they're tolerating you because I spoke for you. Trusting you alone with their sick children through the dark. That's a different animal entirely. One of them decides you're a threat at 3 in the morning. We've got worse than a fever on our hands." Old anger rose in her throat, the familiar burn of being judged for what she was instead of what she could do. But then she remembered the ridge. Remembered what Cole had said about the wall, about penance, about a grief dressed up as strength. She had forced people her whole life. It had never once made a single one of them trust her. It had only made them afraid. "Then I will not force it," she said. "I will earn it." She crossed to Samuel Hart where he stood in the doorway. "Your people do not trust me. I understand exactly why, and I will not waste breath arguing it. But these children need care through the night, that one man cannot give alone, and you know that as well as he does. So here is what I offer you." She held his eyes. "You or any man you choose stays in this room the whole night, watches every single thing I do, questions every move of my hands. The instant you believe I am a danger to one of these children, you stop me, and I will not lift a finger against you for it. But you let me help save them until that moment comes." Hart studied her a long time. "Why? Why would an Apache woman sit up all night, saving the children of people who'd raid your camp given half a chance? Because caring about children should not need a reason past them being children." She did not waver. "Because your fear of me does not change what is right. And because if I stood where you are standing, with my own child burning up in the next room, I would want somebody strong enough to help. No matter one thing about where they came from or what people claimed them. Strong enough." Something moved at the corner of Hart's mouth. "You're certainly that. Man'd have to be blind not to see it. Strength was never only about fighting." Nasha gestured to the small bodies laboring for breath on the cots. "My grandmother taught me that before I was old enough to understand it. Let me show you the rest of what it looks like." Hart looked to Cole. Cole gave a single nod. And finally the older man let out a long breath that seemed to carry a great deal of his life inside it. "I'll stay, I'll watch. But the first sign of—" "There will be no sign," Nasha said. "You have my word. And my word is the only thing I have never once broken." Through the long night she worked beside Cole with a focus that shut out the entire world. She learned to read what he read. The catch in a breath. The dampness of skin gone clammy when it should have been dry. When the smallest boy seized, his small spine bowing up off the cot, she was the one who held him steady, while Cole forced the medicine past his locked teeth. Her strength turned for once entirely toward keeping a body whole instead of breaking one. And Samuel Hart watched every minute of it. Watched her enormous hands cradle a fevered child's skull as though it were a bird's egg. Watched her hum something low in Apache. To quiet a crying girl, the melody soft and unexpected in that grim, close room. And somewhere in the deepest hour of the dark, Cole saw the suspicion drain slowly out of the settlement leader's face, and something closer to shame settle in where it had been. By the gray edge of dawn, 5 of the 7 children slept easy, their fevers broken, their small chests rising and falling in the deep, even rhythm of true rest. The 2 youngest still hung in the balance. But they hung. They had not slipped. Cole dropped into a chair by the fire, exhaustion carved into every line of him. "We might have gotten here in time." Might. Hart asked from the doorway. These 2, Cole nodded at the smallest boy and the little girl. "The next few hours tell it. Fever breaks by mid-morning, they live to grow old." If it holds past noon, he did not finish. He had stopped finishing that particular sentence years ago, back when finishing it had cost him too much. Nasha stood at the window, watching the sky bleed slowly from black to a pale amber. And she felt Cole come up beside her, felt his presence at her shoulder like heat off a banked fire, close but not crowding. "You were right," Hart said behind them. They both turned. The settlement leader looked wrung out and hollow-eyed, but there was something honest in his face that had not been there the evening before. About strength. About what matters when the chips are truly down. "I looked at you last night and I saw an Apache, and I judged you by every hard story I'd ever been told. And you sat up all night saving children who aren't yours, from people who'd give you nothing but grief in return." He shook his head slow. "I judged you by your people instead of by you. That was a small thing to do, and I'm ashamed of it." "You were protecting your own," Nasha said. "I know that better than most. I have done it longer, and I have done worse things in its name than mistrust a stranger. Maybe that's the sickness in all of us out here." Hart's voice dropped low and tired. "Every one of us so busy guarding our own that we forget the folks on the other side of the ridge are just people trying to live through the same hard night we are. And here is a thing worth stopping on for a moment, because it would be easy to let a line like that slide right past. Sit with it. 2 peoples. A whole territory built on the bone-deep certainty that the folks across the ridge are the enemy, that their grief is worth less than your own, that a child of theirs is a stranger while a child of yours is the whole world. And it took 1 long night, 7 fevers, and a woman everyone in that square had been taught to fear, to burn all of that certainty down to nothing. Not a treaty did it, not a sermon, just a sickness that did not care what people a child belonged to, and 2 exhausted human beings willing to fight it side by side until sunrise. As the morning light finally filled the room, the youngest child, the girl of 5, opened her eyes clear for the first time in days. She looked up at her mother and said something small and ordinary about being thirsty, and her mother broke into sobs of a relief, so total it seemed to empty her out where she stood. And within the hour the last boy's fever crested and broke, sweat soaking the blankets as the sickness lost its grip on him at last. They had done it. Against the distance at the time, and every reason it should not have worked. 7 children who would have gone cold into the ground were going to see another summer instead, and a great many summers after it. Cole found Nasha at the window a while later, watching the settlement wake to a morning it had not been sure it would get. "You were something in there," he said quietly. "I've worked a lot of fevers with a lot of people. Never had hands beside me that steady. I only did what needed doing. That's exactly what makes it something." He stood beside her, close but not touching. "You showed a whole town that strength isn't a fist in a man's face. It's showing up when it matters and doing the hard, unglamorous work that saves a life. There's men in this territory been called strong their whole lives who couldn't have held that boy through his seizure without going to pieces." She turned to face him, and the new morning light caught in her eyes and warmed the brown of them to something near amber. "I learned it from watching you, the first day. You never once tried to prove you were strong enough to match me, fist for fist. You just proved you were strong enough to stand beside me and not be afraid of what I am. No man has ever done that. Not in 25 years." The words hung between them, charged pleased with everything the two of them had discovered over the hard days behind them. And Cole lifted a hand, slow, and this time it did not hover uncertain near her face the way it had at the passage. This time it found her jaw, and she did not pull away, and for one suspended breath in the amber light of a saved morning. The whole rest of the world simply fell away, and left only the two of them standing at the window. He never got to close the distance, because that was the exact moment the horses came. Many horses, ridden hard and reined in all at once out in the square, hooves stamping and blowing in the cold morning air, and a voice she did not know called out across the settlement in the flat, easy drawl of a man long accustomed to being obeyed the first time he spoke, Samuel Hart. "Come on out here and let's you and me settle our business." Hart's face went the color of old ash. Every ounce of the peace that the sunrise had brought him drained straight out of it. Nasha followed him to the door, and through it she saw them. A dozen mounted men fanned out across the square, rifles resting easy across their saddle bows in the way of men who want you to see the guns without quite pointing them. At their center sat a lean man in a good wool coat, silver at his temples, a gold watch chain catching the new sun across a clean white shirt no trail had ever touched. And half a length back at his right hand sat the gray ghost from the crowd, Emmett Doyle. Rifle in his hands now, his flat eyes already fixed on Nasha, as though he had spent the whole night waiting for her to step into the light. "Silas Vane," Hart breathed. "God help us all." Vane's gaze swept the settlement with the mild interest of a man appraising cattle at auction. "Heard you had sickness in the night. Heard a man rode in with medicine and a savage for a guide. Glad to see Christian charities still alive out in this country." His smile never once reached his eyes. "Now, about the corridor, Samuel. My company needs this ground for the wagon road, same as I've told you 3 times now. Polite as a preacher each time. I've been more than patient, but patience has a bottom to it, and this morning we have finally scraped it." "This is our land," Hart said, and his voice shook despite everything. "We've got a claim filed proper, legal. In the territorial office, you've got a claim." Vane's smile widened by a hair. "And I've got your note. Every dollar you borrowed from my bank to raise this pretty little town out of the dirt, due in full. Today, or I take the ground you built it on in settlement, and we call ourselves square. And everybody goes home." The whole thing turned then, in Nasha's understanding, like a key finding its lock. Because Vane had not merely bought the guns. He had bought the leader, Samuel Hart. The man who had sat up the entire night, watching an Apache woman save his people's children. The man who had confessed his shame to her not an hour past, was mortgaged body and soul to the very man who now meant to clear his whole town off the map. The debt was the leash. Vane had held it this whole time. His shoulders bowed under a weight Nasha recognized, because she had carried its cousin for 10 years. Cole stepped up into the doorway beside her, and his voice carried out flat and cold across the square. 12 guns to collect 1 debt. That's a lot of powder for a banker to bring to a friendly negotiation. Vane's eyes moved to him without hurry. "There's a reason I brought them. The same reason I hired the man beside me. Some ground doesn't care to be crossed, and some people don't care to be reasonable." His gaze slid to Nasha and settled there, cold and appraising. "I understand there's been an Apache making my canyon difficult these 10 years. Cost me a great deal of powder and a great deal of time. And here she stands. Small world out here in the big country." Doyle spoke then for the first time, and his voice was exactly as she remembered it from a lifetime ago. Soft, reasonable. The voice that had asked a 15-year-old girl for shelter and repaid her kindness with 14 graves. "Told you she'd turn up in her own time, Mr. Vane." A thin smile crawled across his gray face. She was always the sentimental one, even as a girl. Always came running the second there were children needing saving. You could set your watch by that soft heart of hers. He looked at Nasha directly now, and the years fell away between them. "Hello again, girl. You got bigger." The words landed like a brand pressed to skin. Because he knew her. He had studied her 10 years ago the same cold way he had studied the paths and the water and the gaps in the watch. He had known she could not walk past a dying child if her own life depended on it. He had counted on that softness, weaponized it, and now he stood there naming it out loud in front of everyone. As though her mercy were a joke the two of them shared. Nasha stepped out into the square, one long stride past the doorway. Nasha, Cole's hand caught her wrist. Don't. Not like this. Not out in the open into a dozen rifles. That's exactly what he wants, and you know it. He murdered 14 of my people. Her voice came out terribly quiet, the quiet of deep water. My mother among them. He is going to look me in the eye while he answers for it. I have waited 10 years for this exact morning, and he's going to put a bullet through you the second you're clear of this doorway, and it won't bring back a single one of them. Cole's grip tightened. Urgent now. You told me on the ridge you built a wall so you'd never again be the reason your people bled. You walk into those guns for a debt of blood, and Itza buries you next, and your band loses the only wall they've got. Don't hand Doyle one more of your dead. Not even yourself. She stopped. Because he was right, and she hated with her whole body that he was right. Doyle watched the exchange with open amusement, rifle easy in his hands. Listen to your cowboy, giant. He's the only thing in this square with any sense in his head, and that was when Samuel Hart raised his own. He looked at Vane, at the dozen rifles, at the note in the banker's saddlebag that owned every board and nail of the life he had built. And then he looked back through the infirmary door, at 7 children who were alive that morning because a woman his own people had been taught to fear had held them through the dark and asked for nothing in return. And something in the man broke clean and set itself straight in the very same instant. No, Hart said. Vane's brow lifted a fraction. No, you'll get your money. Every dollar of it, if I have to work the rest of my life to pay it and die still owing the last of it. Hart's voice steadied as he spoke, the way a man's does when he finally stops running from a thing he has run from for years. But you don't get these people. You don't get their homes. And by God, you do not get to ride onto this ground alongside the man who slaughtered her family and expect me to stand in my own doorway and let it happen. Not after last night. Not after what I watched her hands do, Samuel. Vane's voice had lost every ounce of its easy drawl. You are in no position to refuse me anything, maybe not. Hart reached back inside the door and came out with an old rifle of his own and worked the lever with hands that had not forgotten how. But I've spent my whole life protecting my own and calling it decency and telling myself that was enough. She showed me the difference last night, without ever meaning to teach me a thing. Decency doesn't ask what people the dying child belongs to. His jaw set hard, and it does not sell its neighbors to a man like you to save its own skin. The square went taut as a drawn bowstring. 12 of Vane's guns against 1 settlement leader, 1 cowboy, and an Apache woman with no weapon in her hands. It was bad arithmetic by any count a man cared to run. Except the arithmetic had already begun to change, and Vane did not yet know it, because a wall of dust was rising along the eastern rim of the country behind him, and out of that dust came riders, Apache riders, a dozen, then 2 dozen. Itza at their head on his gray horse painted for war, the low morning sun at their backs, so that they came down out of the light like something the land itself had risen up, to spit at the men who meant to carve it into a road. Nasha's breath caught hard in her chest, her band, her people. The elder who had sworn to her face that she was abandoning her duty had not sat behind the safety of the canyon walls after all. He had read the same survey stakes she had. He had smelled the same burnt powder in the passage. And somewhere in the days since she rode out, the old man had made the same turn. Hart had just made in his doorway, and had chosen to ride out and fight the true enemy instead of the imagined one that had kept him small and afraid for so many years. The odds in the square inverted in the span of a single held breath. Vane's men shifted in their saddles. Rifles that had rested so easy now came up uncertain, muzzles wavering between the doorway and the wall of painted riders closing in behind them, and Silas Vane, who had bought and bribed and blasted his way across the whole of this territory, felt the ground move under his careful plans for the very first time. But Emmett Doyle did not wait to see how the arithmetic settled. Because Doyle had lived 10 years, knowing this morning might one day come for him, and a cornered man who has already betrayed everything, once has nothing left in the world to lose by doing it again. He swung his rifle up, toward Nasha, toward the woman whose trust he had sold for coin, whose mother he had buried in a cold dawn, whose face had haunted whatever thin thing passed for his conscience through a full decade of taking other men's money to do other men's killing. Nasha saw the barrel come around, and she moved, not away from it, toward it. She crossed the open ground faster than any woman her size had a right to move. inside the arc of the rifle before Doyle could bring the sights to bear. Her hand closed over the hot barrel and wrenched it. Skyward in the same motion the hammer fell, and the shot cracked harmlessly up into the pale morning sky. And then she had him. One enormous hand closed around his collar, and she hauled him bodily up out of the saddle and slammed him down into the dirt of the square. Hard enough to empty every ounce of air from his lungs. Not hard enough to end him. She stood over him, and every muscle in her body screamed at her to finish it. Her knife was at her hip. His throat lay bare and gray in the morning light. 10 years of grief pounded behind her eyes like a war drum, and every one of the 14 voices she had buried cried out from under the ground for the simple, clean justice of it. One motion, one draw. A debt 10 years overdue, paid in the only currency it had ever asked for. Doyle looked up at her, gasping, waiting for the blade to come. "Do it," he rasped, and it came out almost like a plea. "You've wanted to for 10 years, girl. I can see it in your face plain as morning. So do it and be done. Prove you're the savage they all think you are." And this was the moment, the one her whole hard life had been building toward, without her ever once knowing it. Because a girl of 15 had trusted a stranger and paid for it in the blood of the people she loved. And a woman of 25 had spent every year since forging herself into a weapon so that no such thing could ever happen again. Every fist she had ever thrown, every man she had ever laid in the dust at the passage, every wall she had raised and manned alone in the dark. All of it came down at last to this: her hand and a knife, his throat in the dirt. The whole 10-year ledger of her grief balanced on the single question of whether she would open her hand or close it. Her grandmother's voice moved through her then, clear as the spring water in the hidden valley. Real strength is knowing when to open your hand and when to close it into a fist. Nasha had spent a decade closing her hand. She had very nearly forgotten it could do anything else at all. She took her hand off the knife. No. Her voice shook with the sheer enormity of the thing she was choosing. "Killing you does not return my mother to me. It does not wake the 14 you left cold in the dawn. It only makes me the thing you tried to turn me into that morning, 10 years ago. A killer who tells herself she had a good enough reason," she dragged in a breath. "I will not let you have that too. You have taken enough from me. You do not get my hands as well." She hauled him up to his feet by the collar, and she turned him bodily around to face the square. To face Samuel Hart and the settlers gathered behind him, and her own people now ringing the whole of Vane's crew with drawn weapons, the painted riders closing the circle tight. "You will answer for what you did," she said into his ear, low and certain, "but not to my knife in this dirt. You will answer to the law these people are trying to build out here. To a marshal, to a rope, maybe, if there is any justice left in the territory. But you will answer as a man standing before other men. Not as a body in the dust that I can pretend, 10 years from now, I never had to think about again." It was the single hardest thing she had ever done. Harder than lifting the boulder off the grandmother. Harder than any fight she had ever won at the passage. Because a fight only ever asks a person for their strength, and she had strength to spare. Mercy asked her for something far dearer and far more expensive, and she paid it while every buried voice screamed at her not to. Silas Vane. Seeing his hired gun disarmed and thrown in the dirt, seeing 24 Apache rifles trained steady on his men, and the settlement's own leader leveling a lever gun at his chest, did the only arithmetic a man like him has ever truly understood in his life. He raised his manicured hands, slow, away from the pistol under his good coat. His men, watching him, followed one by one, and the threat drained out of the square like water sinking into cracked and thirsty ground. They bound Doyle and Vane, and the whole crew of hired guns who had ridden in that morning, expecting to collect a town, and instead found themselves collected. Word would ride to the territorial marshal within the hour, carried by Hart's fastest man. The survey charges set in the sacred passage, the debt scheme that had leashed an honest settlement, and a massacre gone 10 years cold, that finally, at long last, had a living witness willing to stand up and name the man who had led 11 guns to her door. When the dust had settled and the prisoners sat bound under guard, and the freed settlement moved through its square in a daze of relief, Itza climbed down off his gray horse and crossed to where Nasha stood, and the whole of his weathered face had changed. The suspicion he had worn her entire life was simply gone from it. "The passage," she asked him first, because she was still, and would always be, the wall. We found the charges. Every one of them, hidden in the folds of the western wall. We pulled the fuses before a single mule could be brought near enough to light them. He studied her a long moment. Your grandmother told me once, when you were still a girl, that you would find your balance on the day you met someone strong enough not to try and break you. I did not believe her. I believed strength was the wall a person built and the fists a person threw. I believed it right up until this morning. His old eyes moved to Cole and back to her. I watched you take your hand off that knife when everything in your body wanted to draw it. That is the strength she meant. That is the strength I never knew how to teach you. A pause. She taught it to you after all, from under the ground. It only took 10 years to grow. Nash's throat closed hard. 10 years she had spent being told, in 100 silent ways, that her mercy was the very thing that had gotten her people killed. And here stood the man who had raised her, telling her at last that the mercy had been the strength all along, and that she had been reading her own story backward from the first page. They rode home to the canyon 2 days later. The grandmother had woken while they were gone, her mind clear and her eyes matched again, her legs splinted and mending. Chattel would walk with a limp for the rest of his life, slow and careful on the bad leg, but he would walk. And the settlement they left behind them was already talking of an agreement, fair trade for safe passage, a road that served everyone who needed it and belonged to no single greedy man who would kill for it. Cole stayed in the region. He did not ask permission, and Nasha did not make him ask. There were settlements all through that hard country that needed medicine, needed supplies, needed a man who knew how to move through the country and asked for nothing back. He would keep near her canyon, close enough to help when the helping was needed, far enough to honor the lines her people needed drawn around themselves. And when he finally told her plainly, standing at the canyon's edge as the sun laid its gold across the walls, that he was tired of running, that he had found the thing worth standing still for, she did not run either. I spent my whole life telling every man who came to that passage that none of them was strong enough for me, she said. And I was right. In a way I never understood until you. I did not need a man strong enough to match my strength, fist for fist. I have never once met that man, and I never will. I needed one strong enough not to be afraid of it. Strong enough to stand beside what I am and not spend one breath trying to make it smaller so he could feel larger. That's a fact, Cole said, not hope. A plain fact, and I'll stake my life on it. When he kissed her, it was gentle and it was certain, and it carried no apology anywhere in it. And Nasha, who had spent 10 years believing that letting a single soul pass the wall was the one mistake that got the people she loved buried, understood at last that keeping the whole world out had been its own slow kind of dying, quieter than a grave, but a grave all the same. Now sit with that a while before you go, because Nasha's whole hard story turns on one single truth, and it is a truth worth carrying home with you and setting down somewhere you can see it. She spent 10 years believing her strength was the wall, the fists, the fear she put into the eyes of every man who rode up on her passage, and every year that wall climbed a little higher and grew a little more lonesome, and she called that safety. She called it strength. But the wall never once healed the wound underneath it. It only hid the bleeding so no one, not even herself, could see how much she was still losing. It took a man willing to look past the stone. It took one long night spent saving children who were not hers, and it took a mortal choice, made in the dirt with a knife at her hip, to open her hand instead of closing it, before she finally understood the thing her grandmother had tried her whole life to teach her. Real strength was never about how hard a person could strike. It was about knowing, in the deciding moment, when not to. It was about staying when every instinct you own is screaming at you to run for the horizon. It was about being brave enough to let one person pass the wall, even after a stranger's once taught you that the wall was the only thing keeping you alive. We build these walls, every one of us, after the betrayal, after the loss, after the world proves, one hard time too many, that it cannot be trusted with our softest parts, and we call them strength. We tell ourselves we are protecting what matters, and sometimes for a while we even are. But how often is the wall really just a wound we have dressed up in armor so that nobody, ourselves least of all, can see that it is still bleeding underneath? How often do we lock out the very people who might have helped us finally heal? It makes you wonder how many strong people are walking through this world right now, carrying grief they have never once set down, manning walls they raised so long ago they have forgotten there was ever a door built into them, waiting without even knowing they are waiting for one person strong enough to stand on the other side and simply refuse to be afraid of what they find there. So let me ask you something, friend, before this story lets you go. Have you ever built a wall to keep yourself safe, only to realize years down the road that it kept out the very people who might have healed you? Have you ever been judged for what you looked like on the outside, long before anyone bothered to learn the hard story underneath? Have you ever, just once, found the courage to take your own hand off the knife? Tell me about it down in the comments, because your story might turn out to be the very one that gives somebody else the courage to open their own hand at last. And if this tale moved something in you this morning, stay a while and stay with us. There are more stories like Nasha's waiting to be told. Stories where the strongest thing a person ever does is not throw the punch, or win the fight, or hold the line one more lonely year. It is finally, after all that time, letting someone in.